Beowulf, Chapter 17. Finn released a few of his soldiers, allowed them to return to their distant towns and estates. Hengist lived the whole stormy winter through, there with Finn whom he hated. But his heart lived in Denmark, which he and the other survivors could not visit, could not sail to, as long as the wind-whipped sea crashed and whirled, or while winter's cold hands froze the water hard, tied it in icy knots. They would wait for the new year, for spring to come following the sun, melting the old year away and reopening the ocean. Winter was over. The earth grew lovely, and Hengist dreamed of his home. But revenge came first. Settling his bitter feud with Finn, whose bloody sword he could never forget, he planned and waited, wove plans and waited. Then a Danish warrior dropped a sword in his lap, a weapon Finn and his men remembered and feared. And the time had come, and Hengist rose, hearing the Danes murmur, and drove his new sword into Finn's belly, butchering that king under his own roof. And the Danes rose, their hearts full of Finn's treachery, and the misery he'd brought them, their sword arms restless and eager. The hall they'd shared with their enemies ran red with enemy blood, and bodies rolled on the floor beside Finn. They took the queen, looted everything they could find that belonged to her dead husband, loaded their ships with rings, necklaces, shining jewels, wonderfully worked, and sailed, bringing treasure and a willing captive to the land she'd left and had longed for, alone no longer. The singer finished his song. His listeners laughed and drank, their pleasure loud in that hall. The cupbearers hurried with their sparkling vessels. And then the Queen Wealhtheow, wearing her bright crown, appeared among them, came to Hrothgar and Hrothulf, his nephew. Seated peacefully together, their friendship and Hrothulf's good faith still unbroken. And Unferth sat at Hrothgar's feet. Everyone trusted him, believed in his courage, although he'd spill his relative's blood. Then Wealhtheow spoke. "Accept this cup, my lord and king. May happiness come to the Danes' great ring-giver. May the Geats receive mild words from your mouth, words they have earned. Let gifts flow freely from your open hands, treasures your armies have brought you from all over the world. I have heard that the greatest of the Geats now rests in your heart like a son. Heorot stands purged, restored by his faith. Celebrate his courage. Rejoice and be generous while a kingdom sits in your palm, and a people and power that death will steal. But your sons will be safe, sheltered in Hrothulf's gracious protection. If fate takes their father while Hrothulf is alive, I know your nephew's kindness. I know he'll repay in good kind the goodness you have shown him. Support your two sons as you and I sustained him in his own early days. His father dead and he but a boy." Then she walked to the bench where Hrethric and Hrothmund, her two sons, sat together. Beowulf, prince of the Geats, was seated between them. Crossing the hall, she sat quietly at their side. Chapter 18. They brought a foaming cup and offered it to Beowulf. It was taken and given in friendship, and he was given a mail shirt, and golden armbands, and the most beautiful necklace known to men. Nowhere in any treasure hoard anywhere on earth was there anything like it, not since Hama carried the Brosing's necklace home to his glorious city, saved its tight-carved jewels, and his skin, and his soul from Emeric's treasury, and then came to God. Hygelac had it next, Swerting's grandson, defending the golden hoard his battle-hard hands had won for him. The Geats' proud king lost it, was carried away by fate when too much pride had made him feud with the Frisians. He had asked for misery. It was granted him. He'd borne those precious stones on a ship's broad back. He fell beneath his shield, his body, and his shining coat of mail, and that necklace. All lay for Franks to pluck, for jackal warriors to find when they walked through the rows of corpses. Geats and their king lay slaughtered wherever the robbers looked. The warriors shouted, and Wealhtheow spoke. "Where are these bright jewels, beloved Beowulf? Enjoy them, and the rings, and the gold, O fortunate young warrior. Grow richer, let your fame and your strength go hand in hand, and lend these two boys your wise and gentle heart. I'll remember your kindness. Your glory is too great to forget. It will last forever. Wherever on the earth is surrounded by the sea, the wind's home, and waves lap at its walls. Be happy for as long as you live. Your good fortune warms my soul. Spread your blessed protection across my son and my king's son. All men speak softly here, speak mildly, and trust their neighbors. Protect their lord, our loyal followers who would fight as joyfully as they drink. May your heart help you do as I ask. She returned to her seat. The soldiers ate and drank like kings. The savage fate decreed for them hung dark and unknown. What would follow if, after nightfall, when Hrothgar withdrew from the hall, sought his bed and left his soldiers to theirs? Herod would house a host of men that night, as it had been meant to do. They stacked away the benches, spread out blankets and pillows, but those beer-drinking sleepers lay down with death beside their beds. They slept with their shining shields at the edge of their pillows. The hall was filled with helmets hanging near motionless heads. Spears stood by the hands. Their hammered mail shirts covered their chests. It was the Danes' custom to be ready for war, wherever they rested, at home or in foreign lands, at their lord's quick call if he needed them. If trouble came to their king, they knew how soldiers must live. Chapter 19. They sank into sleep. The price of that evening's rest was too high for the Dane who bought it with his life, paying as others had paid when Grendel inhabited Heorot, the hall, till his crimes pulled him into hell. And now it was known that a monster had died, but a monster still lived, and meant revenge. She'd brooded on her loss. Misery had brewed in her heart. That female horror, Grendel's mother, living in the murky, cold lake assigned her since Cain had killed his only brother, slain his father's son with an angry sword. God drove him off, outlawed him to the dry and barren desert, and branded him with a murderer's mark. And he bore a race of fiends accused like their father. So Grendel was drawn to Heorot, an outcast come to meet the man who awaited him. He'd snatched at Beowulf's arm, but that prince remembered God's grace and the strength he'd given him, and relied on the Lord for all the help, the comfort and support he would need. He killed the monster, as God had meant him to do, tore the fiend apart and forced him to run as rapidly as he could towards death's cold, waiting hands. His mother's sad heart and her greed drove her from her den on the dangerous pathway of revenge. So she reached Heorot, where the Danes slept as though already dead. Her visit ended their good fortune, reversed the bright vein of their luck. No female, no matter how fierce, could have come with a man's strength, fought with the power and courage men fight with, smashing their shining swords, their bloody hammer-forged blades onto boar-headed helmets, slashing and stabbing with the sharpest of points. The soldiers raised their shields and drew those gleaming swords, swung them above the piled-up benches, leaving their mail shirts and their helmets where they'd lain when the terror took hold of them. To save her life, she moved still faster, took a single victim and fled from the hall, running to the moors, discovered, but her supper assured, sheltered in her dripping claws. She'd taken Hrothgar's closest friend, the man he most loved of all men on earth. She killed a glorious soldier, cut a noble life short. No Geat could have stopped her. Beowulf and his band had been given better beds. Sleep had come to them in a different hall. Then all Heorot burst into shouts. She had carried off Grendel's claw. Sorrow had returned to Denmark. They'd traded deaths, Danes and monsters, and no one had won. Both had lost. The wise old king trembled in anger and grief, his dearest friend and adviser dead. Beowulf was sent for at once. Messenger went swiftly to his rooms and brought him. He came, his band about him, as dawn was breaking through the best of all the warriors, walking to where Hrothgar sat waiting, the gray-haired king wondering if God would ever end this misery. The Geats tramped quickly through the hall. Their steps beat and echoed in the silence. Beowulf rehearsed the words he would want with Hrothgar. He'd asked the Danes' great lord if all were at peace, if the night had passed quietly. Chapter 20. Hrothgar answered him, protector of his people. There's no happiness to ask about. Anguish has descended on the Danes. Esher is dead. Ermlaf's older brother and my own most trusted counselor and friend, my comrade, when we went into battle, who'd beaten back enemy swords, standing at my side. All my soldiers should be as he was, their hearts as brave and as wise. Another wandering fiend has found him in Heorot, murdered him, fled with his corpse. He'll be eaten, his flesh become a horrible feast. And who knows where the beast may be hiding, its belly stuffed full. She's taking revenge for your victory over Grendel, for your strength, your mighty grip, and that monster's death. For years he'd been preying on my people. You came, he was dead in a single day, and now there's another one. A second hungry fiend, determined to avenge the first. A monster willing and more than able to bring us more sorrow. or so it must seem to the many men mourning that noble treasure-giver. For all men were treated nobly by those hands now forever closed. I have heard that my people, peasants working in the fields, have seen a pair of such fiends wandering in the moors and marshes, giant monsters living in those desert lands. And they've said to my wise men that, as well as they could see, one of the devils was a female creature. The other, they say, walked through the wilderness like a man, but mightier than any man. They were frightened, and they fled, hoping to find help in Herod. They named the huge one Grendel. If he had a father, no one knew him, or whether there'd been others before these two. Hidden evil before hidden evil. They live in secret places, windy cliffs, wolf dens where water pours from the rocks, then runs underground, where mist steams like black clouds, and the groves of trees growing out over their lake are all covered with frozen spray, and wind down snake-like roots that reach as far as the water and help keep it dark. At night that lake burns like a torch. No one knows its bottom. No wisdom reaches such depths. A deer hunted through the woods by packs of hounds, a stag with great horns, though driven through the forest from faraway places, prefers to die on those shores, refuses to save its life in the water. It isn't far, nor is it a pleasant spot. When the wind stirs and storms, waves splash towards the sky, as dark as the air, as black as the rain that the heavens weep. Our only help, again, lies with you. Grendel's mother is hidden in her terrible home, in a place you've not seen. Seek it if you dare. Save us once more, and again twisted gold, heaped up ancient treasure, will reward you for the battle you win. Chapter 21. Beowulf spoke. Let your sorrow end. It is better for us all to avenge our friends, not mourn them forever. Each of us will come to the end of this life on earth. He who can earn it should fight for the glory of his name. Fame after death is the noblest of goals. Arise, guardian of this kingdom. Let us go, as quickly as we can, and have a look at this lady monster. I promise you this, she'll find no shelter, no hole in the ground, no towering tree, no deep bottom of a lake, where her sins can hide. Be patient for one more day of misery. I ask for no longer. The old king leaped to his feet, gave thanks to the god for such words. Then Hrothgar's horse was brought, saddled and bridled. The Danes' wise ruler rode stately and splendid. Shield-bearing soldiers marched at his side. The monster's tracks led them through the forest. They followed her heavy feet. They had swept straight across the shadowy wasteland, her burden the lifeless body of the best of Hrothgar's men. The trail took them up towering rocky hills, and over narrow, winding paths they had never seen, down steep and slippery cliffs where creatures from deep in the earth hid in their holes. Hrothgar rode in front, with a few of his most knowing men, to find their way. Then suddenly, where clumps of trees bent across cold grey stones, they came to a dismal wood. Below them was the lake, its water bloody and bubbling, and the Danes shivered, miserable, mighty men tormented by grief, seeing, there on that cliff above the water, Esher's bloody head. They looked down at the lake, felt how its heat rose up, watched the waves blood-stained swirling. Their battle horns sounded, then sounded again. Then they set down their weapons. They could see the water crawling with snakes, fantastic serpents swimming in the boiling lake, the sea beasts lying on the rocks, the kind that infest the ocean in the early dawn, often ending some ship's journey with their wild jaws. They rushed angrily out of sight when the battle horns blew. Beowulf aimed an arrow at one of the beasts, swimming sluggishly away, and the point pierced its hide, stabbed to its heart. Its life leaked out, death swept it off. Quickly, before the dying monster could escape, they hooked its thrashing body with the curved boar spears, fought it to land, drew it up on the bluff, then stood and stared at the incredible wave-roamer, covered with strange scales and horrible. Then Beowulf began to fasten on his armor, not afraid for his life, but knowing the woven mail, with its hammered links, could save that life when he lowered himself into the lake, keep slimy monsters' claws from snatching at his heart, preserve him for the battle he was sent to fight. Hrothgar's helmet would defend him, that ancient, shining treasure encircled with hard-rolled metal, set there by some smith's long-dead hand, would block all battle swords, stop all blades from cutting at him when he'd swum toward the bottom, gone down in the surging water, deep toward the swirling sands. And Unferth helped him. Hrothgar's courtier lent him a famous weapon, a fine, hilted old sword named Hrunting. It had an old iron blade, etched and shining and hardened in blood. No one who'd worn it in a battle, swung it in dangerous places, daring and brave, had ever been deserted. Nor was Beowulf's journey the first time it was taken to an enemy's camp, or asked to support some hero's courage and win him glory. Unferth had tried to forget his greeting to Beowulf, his drunken speech of welcome. A mighty warrior, he lent his weapon to a better one. Only Beowulf would risk his life in that lake. Unferth was afraid, gave up that chance to work wonders, win glory and a hero's fame. But Beowulf and fear were strangers. He stood ready to dive into battle. Chapter 22. Then Ejitho's brave son spoke. Remember, Hrothgar, O knowing king, now when my danger is near, the warm words we uttered. And if your enemy should end my life, then be, O generous prince, forever the father and protector of all whom I leave behind me. Here in your hands, my beloved comrades left with no leader, their leader dead. And the precious gifts you gave me, my friend, send them to Hygelac. May he see in their golden brightness the Geats' great lord gazing at your treasure. That here in Denmark I found a noble protector, a giver of rings, whose rewards I won and briefly relished. And you, Unferth, let my famous old sword stay in your hands. I shall shape glory with Hrunting, or death will hurry me from the earth. As his words ended, he leaped into the lake, would not wait for anyone's answer. The heaving water covered him over. For hours he sank through the waves. At last he saw the mud of the bottom, and all at once the greedy she-wolf who'd ruled those waters for 100 years discovered him, saw that a creature from above had come to explore the bottom of her wet world. She welcomed him in her claws, clutched at him savagely, but could not harm him, tried to work her fingers through the tight ring-woven mail on his breast, but tore and scratched in vain. Then she carried him, armor and sword and all, to her home. He struggled to free his weapon, and failed. The fight brought other monsters swimming to see her catch, a host of sea beasts, who beat at his mail, stabbing with tusks and teeth as they followed along. Then he realized, suddenly, that she'd brought him into someone's battle hall, and there the water's heat could not hurt him, nor anything in the lake attack him through the building's high arching roof. A brilliant light burned all around him, the lake itself like a fiery flame. Then he saw the mighty water witch, and swung his sword, his ring-marked blade, straight at her head. The iron sang its fierce song, sang Beowulf's strength. But her guests discovered that no sword could slice her evil skin, that Hrunting could not hurt her, was useless now when he needed it. They wrestled. She ripped and tore and clawed at him, bit holes in his helmet, and that too failed him. For the first time in years of being worn to war it would earn no glory. It was the last time anyone would wear it. But Beowulf longed only for fame, leaped back into battle. He tossed his sword aside, angry. The steel-edged blade lay where he dropped it. If weapons were useless, he'd use his hands, the strength in his fingers. So fame comes to men who mean to win it and care about nothing else. He raised his arms and seized her by the shoulder. Anger doubled his strength. He threw her to the floor. She fell, Grendel's fierce mother, and the Geats' proud prince was ready to leap on her. But she rose at once and repaid him with her clutching claws, wildly tearing at him. He was weary, that best and strongest of soldiers. His feet stumbled, and in an instant she had him down, held helpless. Squatting with her weight on his stomach, she drew a dagger, brown with dried blood, and prepared to avenge her only son. But he was stretched on his back, and her stabbing blade was blunted by the woven mail shirt he wore on his chest. The hammered links held. The point could not touch him. He'd have traveled to the bottom of the earth, Ejitho's son, and died there, if that shining woven metal had not helped. And a holy God, who sent him victory, gave judgment for truth and right, ruler of the heavens. Once Beowulf was back on his feet and fighting. Chapter 23. Then he saw, hanging on the wall, a heavy sword, hammered by giants, strong and blessed with their magic, the best of all weapons, but so massive that no ordinary man could lift its carved and decorated length. He drew it from its scabbard, broke the chain on its hilt, and then, savage, now angry and desperate, lifted it high over his head, and struck with all the strength he had left. Caught her in the neck and cut it through, broke bones and all. Her body fell to the floor, lifeless. The sword was wet with her blood, and Beowulf rejoiced at the sight. The brilliant light shone, suddenly, as though burning in that hall and as bright as heaven's own candle lit in the sky. He looked at her home, then, following along the wall, went walking, his hands tight on the sword, his heart still angry. He was hunting another dead monster, and took his weapon with him, for final revenge against Grendel's vicious attacks, his nighttime raids, over and over, coming to Heorot when Hrothgar's men slept, killing them in their beds, eating some on the spot, 15 or more, and running to his loathsome moor with another sickening meal waiting in his pouch. But Beowulf repaid him for those visits, found him lying dead in his corner, armless, exactly as that fierce fighter had sent him out from Heorot, then struck off his head with a single swift blow. The body jerked for the last time, then lay still. The wise old warriors who surrounded Hrothgar, like him staring into the monster's lake, saw the waves surging and blood spurting through. They spoke about Beowulf. All the greybeards whispered together and said that hope was gone, that the hero had lost fame in his life at once. He would never return to the living, come back as triumphant as he had left. Almost all agreed that Grendel's mighty mother, the she-wolf, had killed him. The sun slid over past noon, went further down. The Danes gave up, left the lake and went home, Hrothgar with them. The Geats stayed, sat sadly, watching, imagining they saw their lord, but not believing they would ever see him again. Then the sword melted, blood-soaked, dripping down like water, disappearing like ice when the world's eternal lord loosens invisibility fetters, and unwinds icicles and frost as only he can. He who rules time and seasons. He who is truly God. The monster's hall was full of rich treasures. But all that Beowulf took was Grendel's head and the hilt of the giant's jeweled sword. The rest of that ring-marked blade had dissolved in Grendel's steaming blood, boiling even after his death. And then the battle's only survivor swam up and away from those silent corpses. The water was calm and clean, the whole huge lake peaceful once the demons who lived in it were dead. Then that noble protector of all seamen swam to land, rejoicing in the heavy burdens he was bringing with him. He and all the glorious band of Geats thanked God that their leader had come back unharmed. They left the lake together. The Geats carried Beowulf's helmet, and his mail shirt behind them. The water slowly thickened as the monster's blood came seeping up. They walked quickly, happily, across roads all of them remembered, left the lake and the cliffs alongside it. Brave men staggering under the weight of Grendel's skull, too heavy for fewer than 4 of them to handle, 2 on each side of the spear jammed through it, yet proud of their ugly load and determined that the Danes, seated in Heorot, would see it. Soon 14 Geats arrived at the hall, bold and warlike, and with Beowulf, their lord and leader. They walked on the mead hall, green. Then the Geats' brave prince entered Heorot, covered with glory for the daring battles he had fought. He sought Hrothgar to salute him and show him Grendel's head. He carried that terrible trophy by the hair, brought it straight to where the Danes sat, drinking, the queen among them. It was a weird and wonderful sight, and the warriors stared. Chapter 24. Beowulf spoke. Hrothgar, behold great Healfdene's son, this glorious sign of victory, brought you by joyous Geats. My life was almost lost, fighting for it, struggling under water. I'd have been dead at once, and the fight finished, the she-devil victorious, if our Father in heaven had not helped me. Hrunting, Unferth's noble weapon, could do nothing, nor could I, until the ruler of the world showed me, hanging, shining, and beautiful on a wall, a mighty old sword. So God gives guidance to those who can find it from no one else. I used the weapon he had offered me, drew it, and, when I could, swung it, killed the monstrous hag in her own home. Then the ring-marked blade burned away, as the boiling blood spilled out. I carried off all that was left, this hilt. I've avenged their crimes, and the Danes they've killed. And I promise you that whoever sleeps in Heorot, you, your brave soldiers, anyone of all the people in Denmark, old or young, they and you may now sleep without fear of either monster, mother, or son. Then he gave the golden sword hilt to Hrothgar, who held it in his wrinkled hands and stared at what giants had made, and monsters owned. It was his, an ancient weapon shaped by wonderful smiths, now that Grendel and his evil mother had been driven from the earth, God's enemies scattered and dead. That best of swords belonged to the best of Denmark's rulers, the wisest ring-giver Danish warriors had ever known. The old king bent close to the handle of the ancient relic, and saw written there the story of ancient wars between good and evil, the opening of the waters, the flood sweeping giants away, how they suffered and died, that race who hated the ruler of us all and received judgment from his hands, surging waves that found them wherever they fled. And Hrothgar saw runic letters clearly carved in the shining hilt, spelling its original owner's name, he for whom it was made, with its twisted handle and snake-like carvings. Then he spoke Halfdane's son, and everyone was silent. What I say, speaking from a full memory and after a life spent in seeking what was right for my people, is this. This prince of the Geats, Beowulf, was born a better man. Your fame is everywhere, my friend, reaches to the ends of the earth, and you hold it in your heart wisely, patient with your strengths and our weaknesses. What I said I will do, in the name of the friendship we've sworn. Your strength must solace your people, now and mine no longer. Be not as Hermod once was to my people, too proud to care what their hearts hid, bringing them only destruction and slaughter. In his mad rages he killed them himself, comrades and followers who ate at his table. At the end he was alone, knew none of the joys of life with other men, a famous ruler granted greater strength than anyone alive in his day, but dark and bloodthirsty in spirit. He shared out no treasure, showed his soldiers no road to riches and fame, and then that affliction on his people's face suffered horribly for his sins. Be taught by his lesson, learn what a king must be. I tell his tale, old as I am, only for you. Our eternal Lord grants some men wisdom, some wealth, makes others great. The world is God's. He allows a man to grow famous, and his family rich, gives him land and towns to rule, and delight in, lets his kingdom reach as far as the world runs. And who in human unwisdom, in the middle of such power, remembers that it will all end, and too soon? Prosperity, prosperity, prosperity. Nothing troubles him. No sickness, not passing time, no sorrows, no sudden war breaking out of nowhere, but all the world turns when he spends it. How can he know when he sins?